June 6, 2026. They say our organization is dead, as nations left in droves. Russia, China, Laos, Brazil, the names go on. The United States deserted us, locked themselves into an isolationist bubble, and left the world to die. Nations are on the brink of collapse. Congo, Angola, South Sudan, the list goes on. We are the UN peacekeeping force in Africa. We were sent with what was left of our resources to stabilize the region. But to them, our name is not as important as the things we represent. Prosperity, humanity, keeping stability and security, where all the children of man could thrive and prosper, living full, happy lives without threat from our inner monsters. Ones we had hoped humanity had tamed and subdued. These are the ideals of the old generation. They cling onto some faint hope that the world of old could be restored, that their lives may go back to normal. I do not have that hope myself, nor do many of my fellow peacekeepers. That dream once lived, now it is dead. But for those who look up to us, we must keep going. The plane touched down a few hours ago, and only now do I have time to recollect my thoughts. Our job was to stabilize the region and provide a haven for civilians. The situation is too unstable for us to intervene much more. Our organization is collapsing. We set up camp not far outside the boundaries of a local town in Angola. We're still setting up a camp. Today we set up the runway, the infrastructure, and the refugee tents, and the hope that eventually we can hand them over to the UNHCR. I don't know if we can change the course of the war or the course of the world with what few soldiers we have. Our organization's membership dwindles every day. But if we can affect the course of just one person's life, then I deem it worth it. June 13th, 2026. The first refugees came a few days ago, and they looked like they had trekked for miles. Even the children, too. Almost all of them looked malnourished. The supply plane with humanitarian aid contained food rations, and we distributed it to the starving refugees. Refugees didn't talk or move much. They just stared straight ahead, unable to look at each other, and occasionally cried. Some had injuries, sometimes severe injuries. Our medical staff did their best to treat them on the limited supplies we had. We sent a request back to headquarters requesting more medical supplies, but there are delays. News from home is slow. Our numbers are still decreasing. Last we heard, the United Nations was still bleeding members, and have run into budget issues. Those needing help keep flooding in, like an endless stream of human life. How many people are we supposed to help here? June 20th, 2026. Our camp is overwhelmed. We've radioed back to headquarters to please send more aid. We're short on beds, medical supplies, and we're rapidly running out of food, even though supply planes are flying in as much as they can. We've had to ration our food. Soldiers now frequently split their meals with the refugees just to make sure they have something to eat. The stream of people never stops. It floods through the gates, fleeing from the carnage out west. They're on the run from the violence which engulfed their homeland, the stories. I did not understand their language. Only a few spoke English, but some of my fellow soldiers who could speak with them acted as de facto counselors, listening to their stories and trying to comfort them. Even with the language barrier, I could still tell the enormous grief they share. The wailing of mothers, fathers, grandmothers, and children. Parts of flesh missing, what appear to be bite marks. Nightmares begin haunting me in my sleep, and my morbidly curious mind tries to fill in the gaps of what I do not know. I'm conflicted. Is it better that I remain ignorant, or if only to keep my morale, or the stories get concocted by my mind drive me mad? Which one is worse? The true suffering of the stories of these individuals, or the fantasies my mind play out as I observe and try to connect the dots? June 27th. The things I have heard will never leave me. A reflection of man when all morality fails, when its worst monsters are returned, as human existence is reduced back down to basic survival. The dark monster that remains when even basic humanity breaks down. The warlords are trying to cull the population, as there is no longer enough food to go around and feed everyone. Insane massacres until they can get the number below the required amount, and when that wasn't enough, they resorted to cannibalism. Atrocities blanketing the countryside like a blanket of death. They say anywhere between 30 and 50% of their towns and villages have already been slaughtered, and there are still greater cuts to be made. I do not wish to remember, but I cannot forget for respect to the dead. The details are too many to remember. The faces and descriptions blur together, until there are so many that they could no longer be kept track of. But the overall story is still the same. Loss became anger. Anger became vengeance. And vengeance became loss, over and over, all over the continent. As the cycle of war ripped across the African continent, and the wheel of war continued to turn faster and faster as the dark continent runs with blood. These hatreds continue to find their way everywhere, including here. Loss and vengeance have led to violent retributions against other refugees, vengeance and hatred against previous incidents of vengeance and hatred. But we had protocols for this sort of thing. The other refugees try to help, trying to keep peace in their last semblance of shelter. The flood of human life keeps coming in. Our guns are used to fend off the raids from nearby warlords. They're trying to break in, murder those inside. But with help from more cooperative warlords, we've been able to fend them off for now. July 4th, 2026. The United Nations is breaking down. The world has abandoned us. What is left is to defend for themselves. Due to budgeting issues, we're now experiencing a serious lack of supplies. The organization has become increasingly dysfunctional, with their members either unhappy, left, or collapsing. As the world continues to rock and sway, the organization is becoming increasingly deadlocked on what to do. Fights break out almost every day now. Most of the refugees are trying to help us keep the peace, but those who keep provoking violence are chased out of the camp. We know they likely can't survive out there, but it's either them or all of us. One of my American colleagues, one of the few remaining after the United States went into isolation, broke down during one of these fights, when two groups, in pursuit of some kind of race war, murdered dozens of children in cold blood. There were different tribes, only differing by a few dozen kilometers. We finally restrained him. My colleague broke down and started screaming at the man who committed the atrocities. He was a black man from the Deep South. He'd seen race tensions, but nothing ever like this. He didn't understand. He didn't understand how people could do this, and they're so similar in blood and history. He left for America shortly after. The race conflict made no sense for him, coming from an American perspective. And the more I thought about it, a race war made no sense from coming from any perspective. What he said about the same people and the same blood, that applied to all of us. One of my Christian colleagues had given me a Bible after the events. I hadn't been a genuine believer, but after what I had saw, I thought the Holy Book would be one of the few things which would cleanse my mind after today's events. Starting from Genesis, I started reading, and one line stuck out to me. By the sweat of your brow you shall eat food until you return into the ground, since from it you were taken, and for dust you are, and to dust you shall return. We're all dust, made from the same dust, and died of the same dust. According to their story, we're all related by the first man and the first woman, Adam and Eve. Would they weep, knowing that their children were fighting like this? I looked up towards the ceiling and saw the bed above my bunk. I thought of the Almighty, watching the earth from his perch above the heavens. I wondered whether, with all of our advancements in technology, mankind still believed in God. But I also wondered, the atrocities we commit, does God still believe in us? July 11th, 2026. It's over. The United Nations has collapsed under the dysfunction of its members. The last meeting has dissolved the organization. We're alone out here. Supplies have stopped arriving altogether. We've begun strict rationing of food. The Eastern warlords pounded our gates, and we've repelled them many times, so we're running out of ammo. Many of the original people in the mission are now dead. I'm one of the lucky few, but many of the refugees are taking on the old helmets of the fallen. And we're giving them basic combat training to fill the holes in our ranks. We see them take on the blue helmet, on our ways, and vow to defend the compound. I wonder if we're seeing the next generation in the refugees that took up arms. Will they keep defending the compound once we're gone? The highest ranking officer here, who has assumed de facto control of the operation, has ordered us to evacuate westward, to greatly sparsely populated areas of the west. And our hearts burn, however faintly, the last sparks of the old world. The ideals and hopes of the United Nations, a world free from conflict and international strife, where different peoples could come together to celebrate what they had in common. The operation that spoke that dream is dead now. We're all that remain. The Department of Peace Operations have completely disbanded, but we have been stranded here. I've been assigned the duty of holding off the attackers until everyone can evacuate. I'm almost certain I'm not going to survive this assignment. My moral duty as a soldier, with my comrades leading behind me, and a razor wire and barricades in front of me, I stare down the sight of my gun. Being this close to death is an eerie experience. Knowing you are in danger is one thing. Knowing you only have a few hours left is another. I don't know if there's an afterlife waiting for me. But I'm glad I finally got to read that holy book before I died. But I'm pretty sure it didn't convert me. Whatever the case, I just hope my Maker will smile upon my deeds. I am ready to meet them, whoever they are.